So we're expecting around 100 people or so. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Welcome. Welcome. As you can see, we're going to be starting very shortly. Welcome to the session. Our next Zoom Islamic courses on using Imam Ghazali's educational thought to nurture children's spirituality. So just give me about a minute or so just to allow everyone in so I can get all the technical stuff set up, and then we're going to hand over to our host, Babar Mirza. So I just want to remind everyone, this is the Islamic courses session on using Imam Ghazali's educational thought to nurture children's spirituality. Honored and privileged to have Dr. Farah Ahmed from Cambridge University and Ustada Aisha Gray-Henry, who's the founder and director of the Fons Vitae and Ghazali Children's Project, and she's calling from the US. This is hosted by Babar Mirza, who is a good friend and who's the head teacher of Islamia Primary School and the Director of Education at the Nida Trust. Just some housekeeping rules. Can I just request everyone, please keep your phones or PCs or whatever devices you're using on mute. It is being recorded, so if you're not registered with us, so you haven't registered for the event, please leave your email address on the chat and we'll send you a copy of the session. There is a Q&A session. Please write down your questions on the chat. You'll have an opportunity, subject to the hosts, subject to Baba's permission, you'll get your questions answered. Finally, please support the Ghazali Children's Project by purchasing the books and the workshops. So in a minute, just give me about 30 seconds, I'm just going to admit we've got about nearly 100 people participating in this session. So it's a very popular session, mashallah. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to you right now, Babar. So if you take on to, inshallah, if you could start, inshallah. Thank you. Go ahead, Babar. Yeah.
Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you everyone for attending the session this afternoon, mashallah. Now, Imam Al-Ghazali, who lived from 1058 to 1111, one of the most influential Muslims, a jurist, a theologian and philosopher. He was honored in the history of Islam with the title of Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam. Among his numerous contributions to the renewal of the intellectual life of the 5th Islamic century, he developed a theory of education rooted in his philosophy and aiming at improving the objectives and principles of education. Based on a reflection on the methods and the knowledge of teaching and detailing the relationships between scholars, teachers, and pupils, his education concept had a notable influence inside and outside of the Muslim world. I have with me here two very special guests to discuss the theme for today, which is using Imam Al-Ghazali's educational thought to nurture children's spirituality. We have Ustada Aisha Gray-Henry, who's the founder and director of Fons Vitae and the Al-Ghazali Children's Project. We also have Dr. Farah Ahmed, a research fellow at the University of Cambridge and founder and director of the Islamic Schatzi Foundation. Just to explain the format of this afternoon's webinar, the format will include two short presentations by both speakers, followed by a conversation and Q&A. If you wish to ask a question, then please add your question to the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner and indicate which speaker you wish to answer your question. I have lots of questions myself, so where possible, I will combine my question and your question, inshallah, to save time. I know that we have a mixed audience here this afternoon, both academics and teaching practitioners. And I know that those two groups are not mutually exclusive, but hopefully, inshallah, we can do justice to adapting some of the content to benefit everyone, inshallah. Let us start off by hearing from Ustada Aisha, and let me introduce her properly. Ustada Aisha Gray-Henry Blakemore is the founder and director of the charitable foundation and publishing company Fons Vitae, and one of the co-founders and trustees of the Islamic Text Society of Cambridge. She received her BA at the Sarah Lawrence College and furthered her Islamic Studies program at the American and Al-Azhar University in Cairo. In addition, she has an MA in education from the University of Michigan, was a research fellow at the Cambridge University, and has a PhD from the Faculty of Divinity at Canterbury, Kent. Currently is writing and is a film producer engaged in bringing out Al-Ghazali's Ihya in English for parents and teachers, as well as adapting it to accommodate children's workbooks, school curricula, and educational instructional videos. Over to you, Ustada Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum, my beautiful fasting friends all over the world or wherever you are. And to make one correction, I didn't finish my doctorate. I started in 1989. I started in 1989. There's something flashing saying stop video. Is everything all right?
Yeah, that's fine. Just ignore it. Just ignore it.
Just keep talking. All right. I started in 89, but I've been so busy with publishing, although I've done my research, I haven't written it up, but I'm still seeing my advisor. But I mean, I don't think I need a doctorate. What would I do with something like that at this point? But anyway, I'm so pleased to meet all of you, and I'm glad there's an interest in the Ghazali project. It is something which has saved me personally. You know, I published Ghazali for years with the Tech Society, and here I became a Muslim by reading Ghazali when I was 22. And I went through the crisis, I guess my own crisis, discovering that when I've tried to read the books I've published, they were too scholarly for me. And that in fact, I was reading them and they were so deep, but when I shut the book, I was still me, and I didn't know how to change my lens to see through this. And then the great blessing came of the Ghazali project. My brother Hamza Yusuf, we are all very concerned about children and their education and rote and memorization and, you know, developing the heart and the spiritual character of children. And so the project began, I guess, nearly a decade ago. And it's been quite something to get scholars to get the Arabic from the Dar al-Manhaj edition into English, and then the years of editing that material so that every single hadith is checked, every reference. I mean, that's quite big. And to make the English even more readable for teachers and parents. And then I've been sitting on the couch behind me here. I was thinking of changing my chair so that you could see the garden outside where I sit looking. I've been sitting in this couch now for 8 years, and usually wild turkeys come. And if they come, I'll turn so you can see them. But so the process began of how to say this for children. And I do have grandchildren, some of them that we started. The 5-year-old Layla was 5 when I began, and now she's 14. So it's gone on a long time. But I have with me here in Kentucky now little Bilal and Medina, and they started at age 3 and 5. And they are Ghazali children. They're now 7 and 9. And what I've discovered is the project has made it possible for me to see everything totally differently, because I can understand the inner meanings of what I'm doing. Right now, during this wonderful lockdown, I've been writing the book of Hajj for children. And I just have to tell you, all day long yesterday, I was on the plain of Arafat. I mean, I've done 2 Hajjs and a lot of Umrahs, but it's almost as though I never did, because I didn't understand the meaning. And with this particular book, it's for children, but of course it's for parents too. All of this material is for parents. I'm realizing something I had never understood, that the journey of our life, which ends in death, and the journey of the Hajj, which is the same, dressed in ihram, the grave clothes, right? The Hajj is condensed, you know, to what, a very short time, but the requirements for making the pilgrimage, right, the pilgrimage, are the same for us as children or people in this life. We should be traveling with bare necessities. And we know from Ghazali, he said there are 3 basic needs in life. The first is food, the second is clothing ourselves, and the last is shelter. And in over addressing these 3 needs, we have forgotten our beginning and our end. And certainly with what many of us are experiencing here on lockdown is how few necessities, how few things we really need. But it's not just that. he speaks of the importance of your traveling companions, the kinds of people we associate with, the importance of always having forgiveness at all times, you know, to put our affairs in order before we travel. And all of the things he's talking about are things that we should all be doing in our lives every single moment. So it's really something preparing this material. But what I've discovered is he's talking about the inner journey to your heart, which is reaching the spiritual Kaaba. And because I've been there twice, when I'm writing about what you're supposed to be saying or thinking at the different places, I've discovered he takes you there, you know, and I'm there and I'm seeing it through a whole other lens. Even the dua he includes from the early companions and from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. So I'm just saying that this particular project is like, I mean, I just think it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted right away, you know, because it's just coming through. And when I see my sister Farah and meet Babar, yes, and to hear what they're doing with their educational works and systems, it's like, it makes me weep from relief, you know. So are there any questions that anyone would like to ask?
Okay, right, yes, I think I've got lots of questions actually. There aren't any questions at the moment in the box, but we will, I will, if you have any questions, please do post them in the box on the bottom right corner. But that
My mom has a question.
To ask the questions that I've got, Ustada Aisha. So this project, and I don't know if the audience has watched some of the videos about the wonderful Al-Ghazali project, and you've managed to connect with people around the world who are contributing towards this project. And I've watched all the little videos that the children have been recording as well, talking about the values, etc. Wonderful. I mean, I mean, I'm a head teacher. When I see these projects in action, and particularly when we see in action in terms of the learning in the classrooms, and we see the children producing those wonderful videos, it really is heartening. And I hope
those
videos,
that's really, you know, we've come up with two techniques for the project: the drawing of your heart and putting the dots on it. And really, we as parents should be doing the same thing. It's like al-muhasabi, taking taking account of ourselves. It's that little boy Khaled who did his golden heart and pasted in his room, and he put, "This is for bothering my sister, this is for this." And then he said, "And we were making a journey and I polished them all off, and now my heart is golden." It is so good that children can identify with their fitra. And when their mother and father are saying, "There you go, you did it again, go to your room, time out," they can't be hurt by that, because that's not who they are. They know that they are the golden heart, the fitra. And so the idea of them observing their hearts, and we should do the same. Have a list, maybe on a yellow legal pad, and check off, I'm doing better with that, you know? I'm not hassling my husband every minute, you know, for whatever. But then the other activity that you just mentioned, the play acting, is the key. Because children, and you can say, let's say you can say to a child, your two children, share. And they hear that, but the way you say it, they haven't experienced it. So they might think, oh gosh, mother's saying it's like going to bed or eat your spinach. But what I would do with, let's say, Bilal and Medina, I would say, don't share. And they would have so much fun. Play acting. No, you can't have this. No, you can't hold this. And then I would say, now play act sharing. And he would say, would you like to hold my truck, Medina? And she would say, would you like to whatever? And then they discover they've changed a mode of being. It feels good. It was easy. They lost nothing by it. The other day, I was sitting right here at this computer with Medina, and a guest came. And I said, please greet the guest. And she went and did what children do. She put her hand and looked down. And I said, oh, wait, do that again. That's the wrong way to do it. So she did it. And I said, now turn and shake hands and look the person in their eye. And now she does it because so they have to practice. And all those films the kids are sending in, backbiting, being angry, being greedy, lying. They are hilarious. And they're on, everybody, the GhazaliChildren.org website under things to do. And
Should I tell you
children
what my
like
favorite one was? Should I tell you what my favorite one was?
What was
the
your
one
favorite one?
Well, you've got the three girls. I've got two daughters. So when
Yeah.
I saw these three girls, and the two girls actually, and there was a young boy, and so the two girls reminded me of my own two daughters, and so they were playing and they were doing cartwheels in the living room, and they knock over a plant, I think it was, or a jar or a vase of some kind.
Yeah, the mother's
and they
vase.
blame it on their young brother, but in the end they own up to it, and that was just so nice at the end.
It's really funny, and you know, if you can get the children to act everything out. For example, in Ghazali's book on zakat, on charity, which is my favorite, it was the life changer for me, because he points out that everything we are, who we are, our skills, our place in time and space, our connections, everything that we are and have, therefore, is on loan from Allah. It's an amana, a trust. So then he tells these two stories, and I make the children act out the stories. The first is the king, Yani Allah, comes to a rich man who has lands and says, there's a poor family in town, take them food. But the man thinks that he owns this food, right? He's been caring for it. Like when we give charity, how often do we think, I own that, I'm giving from what I own. And so he puts the plate very high up, and the poor family is reaching up, and they feel lonely, like begging and wondering, are we now beholden to him? Cut to the correct way to give. The king goes to a young man who was an orphan adopted by wealthy people who taught him money. And the king says, there's a poor widow, take her some money, you know, so that she can educate her children. So he stoops low and puts the plate of gold low down, and he looks up into her face. And he says, oh, blessed lady, I beg you to receive what I bring on behalf of the king, in order that I may fulfill my loan, my amana to God. Well, there it is. And you have children act that out, and then they understand that what they have, they can't, what they do that's good, they can't take credit for. It is la ilaha illallah. You as teachers, you two were talking about your work in Islamic education. You know, we've been given what we're supposed to be doing, our qualities and skills, and then we're given the people that we're supposed to be sending it to, all the students you all are taking care of. So, I mean, really, we can just bear witness. It's a setup by God, and we're just taking part. Well, these stories, if you get children to act them out, you know, they get it. So I think play acting and keeping a heart are two of the really great methodologies that the project gave. Never mind the two stories I just told you from Ghazali. His stories are so fabulous, you know, I mean, his own stories. But for me, reading the bigger books, the stories kind of got lost in all the rest of it. And yesterday when I was working on Arafat, I realized when I've read Ghazali before, the grown-up books, I read quickly through and I focus on things, but I don't go really in, because now that I have to read it and explain it to children, I have to actually understand what he's saying. And it takes a long time. I mean, I sit for a long time on one sentence. And then when I start going into what I would normally just read, oh, it's so deep and it's so amazing that I start to cry. You know,
so the project then,
amazing project, and to think it's in 13 languages now and all over the world. And the Urdu, the pictures, the illustrations for the Urdu version are so much better than ours that I'm about to offer them to the people bringing out the Arabic version, because they're really good.
Great. Sister Aisha, now let's go. So the project, the Al-Ghazali project, is based upon the Ihya of Imam Al-Ghazali. And so this, the Ihya, he wrote at after a time when he had, I suppose, a real trouble in terms of spiritual trouble that he went through, struggle, and he wrote the Ihya. And so the children's project that you're focusing on is very much mapping to that piece of work, where of course he also reflects upon his own life, his own, let's say, mistakes that he perhaps made when he was younger. Now, do you think of course you've already felt there's a need for this. So are we saying that there isn't enough value-based education, there isn't enough focus on character education out there already?
Yes, there's plenty of ta'lim, learning information, but it's the character development that's so urgently needed. You know, Ghazali opens the Ihya Ulumuddin, his first word, and he's wrote this for scholars, and we start this for children because I'm able to do for, let's say little children, 5-year-olds, even the stories are a little hard for them. Although by the time I've gotten now to, zakat and fasting and Hajj, I've upgraded the language. You know, it's more just the way we all talk. But for little children, this is interesting. The way I began with my granddaughter, Layla, I did the first 4 or 5 chapters of the Ihya in like 3 sentences. I said, Layla, did you know there are 2 kinds of learning? And this is what you're asking about right now. Ghazali says there's the practical learning, all the stuff we know, but then there's the real learning, the special learning. And then Layla said to me, well, what's that, Granny? Oh, that's how to polish your heart. Polish your heart. Oh, didn't you know there are 2 hearts? And then you go from that to, she said, but how does the heart get dirty? Oh, well, you know, if you're 5 years old, you would say, oh, you don't share, you don't help mommy, whatever it is. And then she said, but why would you have to polish that off? Oh, didn't you know there are 2 worlds? This one is very brief and it's got many problems and difficulties which are there to help you polish your heart. And then there's the next world, which is forever. So you've given a child in like 5 minutes, their true nature is the pure golden heart, the fitra. It gets dust on it by these mistakes, which are there to help them get ready to go into the world, the next world. And so they don't have to be afraid of death. So you've already given them a lens through which everything can be fit, you know, because if you're polishing your heart, you have to understand the 10 things which you absolutely can't do. You can't ever backbite. And that becomes so clear.
Yeah, great. Now, obviously, the purpose of us talking about the educational thought of Imam Al-Ghazali, hopefully, that we are able to take some lessons away, perhaps as parents, perhaps as educators. And actually, from researching some of this myself, it really does open one's mind to how much of modern day models are based upon some of the classic models, such as that of Imam Al-Ghazali. So one of the ideas, for example, the aims of education that Imam Al-Ghazali talks about is happiness, achieving happiness, which, you know, I mean, I would love for some of our institutions to really have that plastered on their sort of mission or one of their vision statements, to say actually achieving happiness amongst young people is the aim of education.
Yes, the Kamia Sadat of Ghazali, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let me go to, I'm conscious that there are a growing number of questions in the box, and I don't want to
Farah
ignore
has
them.
to speak. We want to hear from Farah.
Yeah, we will hear it. So Farah, we'll bring you on in 2 minutes. After we just, I think there's one related to your project. So we've got a question now. I would like to know how we turn the books into a syllabus and what guidance you could give us on how to integrate the Ghazali books into a school or homeschool.
Right. Each book comes with a workbook, and it comes with a teacher's manual, and it comes with, for every single chapter, the Quranic verse or hadith it can relate to. It has teaching ideas and it has activities. So we've provided that as a basis from which people can elaborate or create themselves. The Hub Club School in England uses it, and you can see in the documentary film that we have how the head of the school and some of the teachers would sit and think, looking at the workbook and the ideas, we will lower this idea for the 5-year-olds, we will upgrade this for the teenagers. You see what I mean? So that gives a basis for a person to actually use it as a whole teaching model. But I think if it's a normal regular school, like your school, you could, maybe it would go under Islamic studies, or maybe there could be something called tarbiyah, where people are conscious that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, I only came to teach good character. That could be the motto. And then from there, actually look at it consciously. But the materials, of course, if you're a homeschooler and a mother, I find that with my grandchildren, I take the ideas, and then we've said it, but I don't want to always make it a school system. I want to integrate it. Like if we're watching a cartoon and one of the characters does something greedy, I say, oh, look, there's the greedy one. Or we're on the way to the grocery and I can say this, so that it keeps children learning to look out at their daily universe and their playing, as this stuff is not just off at school. It's not some lesson we had. It's actually integrated into every moment, the very fiber of living. So I think as parents and teachers and homeschoolers, we have to find ways to make it relevant to them moment by moment.
Great, thank you so much. Let me bring in Dr. Farah Ahmed here at this point. So just to introduce Dr. Farah before she talks, Dr. Farah Ahmed completed her BA in philosophy from the University of Bristol, followed by a PGCE at the Institute of Education, University of London, and an MEd in Educational Research, and a PhD in Education at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Farah has been researching classical Islamic pedagogy in contemporary contexts, specifically the use of halakha with young British Muslim children. Dr. Farah has been active in Islamic education for 20 years and is involved in setting up of the Center for Research and Evaluation of Muslim Education at the Institute of Education, University of London. She's the founder and director of education at the Islamic Schatzi Foundation, where she runs the Islamic Teachers Education courses. Dr. Farah Ahmed, over to you.
Okay, Jazakallah khair, Babar, for a very lengthy introduction. Alhamdulillah, I just so much to learn, so many different points that Sister Aisha came up with that I would love to pick up on, but I just want to share actually 3 things that I wanted to share with everybody who's attending this webinar. And the first thing was to actually responds to one of the questions that's come up, which is, I want to talk about Imam Al-Ghazali and why he is such an inspiration in terms of his context. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I'm getting some feedback. Yeah? Okay, yeah. Good. Okay, so in terms of this context, the amazing thing about Imam Al-Ghazali is that he lived at a time which was incredibly full of, there was many, many things happening in the world, and the Muslim world was in a lot of upheaval. And his life itself, there's much to be gained from his life and his spiritual journey for us as educators and parents. And what the amazing thing that the Ghazali Children Project has done is translated that at the children's level, but we also can learn a lot about that at the educator level. So, you know, one of the questions is talking about how the way that the person's phrased it is that he fled from the madrasa. Well, actually, I wouldn't say that he fled from the madrasa, but just the context of somebody being at the peak of effectively the vice chancellor of Harvard or Cambridge, which was the equivalent of his position at the time that he leaves the Madrasa Islamia. And he leaves it because for this very specific reason that he feels that his inner is not in tune with his outer. He feels that, yes, he's achieved everything and he is the person who is, you know, most intellectually renowned human being in the world at that time, the Muslim world at that time. But he didn't feel that, all of a sudden he had a crisis that that's not who I am. And that experience that he has, then the fact that he had the courage to not only just face that, but also then to act upon it and to leave that position, but also leave behind that form of formalized learning, where it's just at the beginning of the institutionalization of learning in the Muslim world. Okay, that's just right at that point. And he kind of questions that whole institutionalization of learning, and he goes on this lengthy spiritual journey. And in that, he does go into isolation. Another question of the questions was, what can we learn from the situation of isolation that we're in right now, he isolates himself in a very different way from the world. And he goes through this inner process of really just facing who he is. And that itself leads him eventually to come back and then to teach in a very different kind of way. I can't do justice to that right now, but I felt it was important to give that context, because I know that the Ghazali Children's Project is really just taking that, his experiences, and then trying to translate that to a time when the Muslim world again is full of convulsions. There's lots of things happening. And he's a very inspirational figure, because he has the courage not only to go on the spiritual journey, but he has the courage to also change his mind. He has the courage that when the truth becomes insufficient for him at that level, he moves to the next level of truth. And that is something that, our conceptualization of education today doesn't take account for. The second point I want to come on to is to do with character, and is to do with why we use the term in Shakhsiya schools, why we use the term Shakhsiya for character. And the reason for that is that one of the things that we forget in our mass institutionalized education systems, which are designed on a factory model in the world today, is that ultimately what you're working with is very, very different individual children. And so the reason we use the word Shakhsiya is because it kind of encapsulates that child, Aisha's personality, is not the same as Khadija's. Okay, so when we're teaching Aisha, the lesson that Aisha needs to learn, or the way that we're going to draw out the character of Aisha, is not going to be the same way that we would draw out the character of Khadija. And so that focus is something that's really essential. Another element of Shakhsiya, which I think is very important for us, is that it's about self-motivation and self-direction. You can use the term autonomy, so that as a Muslim, you are choosing not just to be Muslim and not just to behave as Muslim, but to have this inner cleansing of yourself as a Muslim. And I think that's very significant. Another point I want to make in relation to that is that, and I'm covering so many things, and I know I'm doing it very quickly, I can try and elaborate in the question and answers, is that it's very important to recognize that behavior is not the same as spirituality. Okay? When we as educators, even when we're talking about values, or we're talking about character, or we're talking about spirituality, we have this tendency to focus on children's behavior or our own behavior. And I'm not saying behavior is not important, okay? Behavior is very, very important. But I know, even in our schools, you'll have the child who will, if you ask them, what does shukr mean, right? They can give you in the halakha a lengthy explanation of shukr, and when they've given a Hajj shukr and so on and so forth. But when, you're handing something out, they may well just take it and not, they may say jazakallah khairan, but like Sister Aisha said, they're not present in understanding what jazakallah khairan means. They're not present in understanding what shukr alhamdulillah means at that point in time. And that behavior, they may say the words, they may do the action, but has that penetrated the heart? And Ghazali was very, very concerned and interested in this. And as Sister Aisha mentioned, he begins Ihya with this. And Kimya Sadat, which is a summary of Ihya, he begins with this point that it's not about what we do. Of course, that's important, but that can be, if there's a discrepancy between the behavior and what's going on inside, then really we've kind of failed in a way. And I will come on to one thing, I won't talk too long, inshallah, which is that, yes, we focus on this individual personalized education for Shakhsiya in our schools, but we also have a very conscious understanding that the issue of this particular child is never in its never without its context. Okay, all individuals are developing and growing in relation to other beings, other people, their family, their school, and the world. And another thing that Imam al-Ghazali, which I've spent a lot of time working on, is he talks about these relationships, okay, which we know from the Quran, the relationship that we have with ourselves, so with our nafs, and that relationship is a process of shakhsiyah development, okay, it's a process of spiritual growth. then you have the relationship with others, and this is where the behavior comes in. But it's not just behavior, it's connection. We're also connecting to other people, and there's an intangible quality to that. And that is then, there's a relationality in that. And then finally, but probably at the core of it, the peak of it, is the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And my work has all been about that these relationships and this shakhsiyya development is dialogical in this sense, that it's this relationality. And that spiritual development comes from a consciousness of that. And what I want to end up by saying is that when we look at the education from this perspective, it is entirely different to the forms of education that we are used to in terms of schooling, okay? Western styled math schooling is not something that Imam al-Ghazali would recognize. And it's not something that that came out of the Muslim world. It's something that came into the Muslim world. So when we're talking about the educational thought of people like Imam al-Ghazali, we're talking about people who would have thought about the world in a very, very different time and a very different type of way of looking at the world. And that is why their notions of spirituality have a quality and a substance about them that it's quite challenging for us to sort of tap into. I know I've said a lot there, alhamdulillah, but I hope, inshallah, it's been of benefit to people.
Thank you so much, Sister Farah. So you've both spoken about something similar, which is about increasing this connection, which perhaps sometimes is lacking when we're completing some of the ritual actions or any actions or behaviors, as you've mentioned. There sometimes is a lack of meaning for young people. They don't know why they're doing something. It's very empty. And sometimes those actions are collective as well, and connecting with other people as well. And as we've mentioned, sometimes there's no connection with Allah as well. There's no thought about connection with Allah. One thing that came up in a video, Ustad Aisha, one of your videos, you talked about how children should be in the state. So when we are making wudu, for example, we need to be in a certain state of mind. When we're praying, we need to be in a certain state of mind. Our children need to be taught to be in a state of mind. And sometimes this sort of thing is lacking. Even saying the word subhanallah, I think you said in the video. When children say subhanallah, I do this all the time when we start assembly. You say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wallahu akbar. What does it actually mean to say each of those words? Are we encouraging children to get into a state of mind when saying those words, or is it just lip service? One of the things Al-Ghazali, through my research, a lot of what he talked about was about translating things into action. That all the theory must translate into action, but of course there needs to be meaning to it. And I know the Al-Ghazali project, you put a lot of work into establishing the meaning. There are lots of teaching through parables. When you look at the videos, there's all sort of scales where you've got good deeds and bad deeds, and you've got sort of buckets of sand, and I think there are bad deeds in there, and how can you possibly fit? Can you comment a little bit more about that approach, Sister Aisha?
There we go. I'm unmuted. Yeah. Yes. This, all these games and things to help. But I mean, Ghazali said, for example, and we all experience this, he said, now when you're praying, it could just be postures and moving lips, And so he proposes something that I thought, how will this ever be done by children, much less me? But he said, when praying, we all notice, don't we all, that our minds wander, that we don't stay focused. And he said, would you, if you stood before a king, let your mind wander all over the place? And he said, so when you do Allahu Akbar, at that moment, this is a technique, put yourself in to be totally present. It's amazing. You can watch yourself even when you're doing that fade off. But then, of course, you're saying Allahu Akbar in the various phases of the prayers, which can bring you back. And then he did point out that they're modes of being, just what you were speaking of, Babar, that when you're saying Ihdina Sirata, you are not just saying that. Are you just moving words? Or are you feeling, oh, please give me guidance? Or subhanallah, are you in a state of awe? Are your lips just saying that? So it's not that we can achieve all of this, but we can begin to try and be aware of it. And over time, by degrees, and I found that sometimes I don't feel I have time. Imagine, don't have time to be present. But then when you take time and think about where you are in each of these phrases, you find that the prayer opens up into like a universe of light. I mean, it's like giving us prayer. And like the story of the wudu, some little boy told me he was able to do his wudu in 30 seconds. You know, I have amazing talks with children, but in the story in wudu, we have a story. So in the story, for example, an old man comes to the scholar, and now this is addressing Farah's question, the scholar, the institution, the laws, right? And so he comes to the scholar and he says, "Oh, scholar, what is wudu?" And the scholar said, "What's going on? You're an old man, you've lived here your whole life. How could you not know wudu? What is wudu? What is wudu?" So finally the scholar, to get rid of him, said, "I'll just show you." So he goes to the sink and does it and says, "Now you do it." And then the old man gets it all wrong, gets it backward. And the scholar is saying, "Barra, get out." So the old man goes away on his cane, and then the scholar turns to his assistant and says, "You know, this is very strange. Follow him, see what's going on." And the assistant comes back and says, "I'm sorry to tell you this, O scholar, but that is the wali, the elder, the sage of our village." So the scholar puts on his robe and he humbly goes and he kneels before. And he says, "What is wudu?" And he said, "As you are rinsing your hands, you think, oh God, forgive me for what I have just done. Help me to do the right thing," rinsing the mouth. "Oh, forgive me for what I've been saying. Encourage me to say the most beautiful things." And then washing the feet, may my feet guide me for my feet to take me in the right places. So once you start doing your wudu like this, you actually can't stop. It's automatic now. And one of the children in the story says, "Well, this is a great way to polish our heart, because 5 times a day we're actually thinking about what we've just done and we're sorry for it and we're going to try to do better." So what is happening is you can move in these inner meanings, and it actually so enriches, but it makes your prayer life fun, you know?
Absolutely, and it's far too often where we find when there are lessons on Islam and fiqh, let's say, that those lessons can become very dry, and for many children, I think that sometimes irrelevant. And I think one thing you mentioned in one of your videos is Al-Ghazali spiritualizes fiqh, and I think one of the teachers,
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and one of the teachers talked about how in their lessons children found it boring and they found it kind of they were falling asleep, etc. But these examples and of these parables, these examples in the Ihya, also encouraging teachers to talk about their own experiences as well, really made the whole experience real for them.
I like that. Fiqh made fun. But it's also, Hamza Yusuf told me once that the Ihya Ulumuddin is the Quran in a usable order, you know, because you're starting out at the beginning. What is knowledge? And then for each thing, as you go up, and everything is based on the thing behind. So I never take things out of order. It's Ghazali's order. I just put every single key point in its order. And then each idea is supported by hadith and Quran and sayings of the companions and all the rest of this. So like you're getting the hadith and Quran related to exact stage that you're working on in yourself. So and Hamza said, you know, if you did what the Ihya Ulumuddin said, you'd be there, you know. It's what it is. It's a systematic way of approaching things. You know, I've been watching, you know, my very close brothers, Harun Sujic and Abdullah Adim Sanders talking about their wonderful books and how these great, beautiful beings that they have encountered and photographed and written about, you know, you see that, and you see that state of being someone who has reached emptiness and presence, which is all that the Hajj is about. And And then you, of course, know, I would like to be like that. But then how do you be like that? Fiqh? No, you actually, Ghazali actually is a methodology for starting the journey to be who you are. No one but, Abdullah, basically.
MashaAllah. Now, if I can bring Sister Farah in here. Now, if you look at some of the classical models of education, they often talk about childhood as being a very impressionable stage, a time where we can develop character, this character formation. And Al-Ghazali talks about a good upbringing will give children good character and help them to live a righteous life, whereas a bad upbringing will spoil their character. Do you think that there are missed opportunities at the moment?
Wow.
I mean, alhamdulillah, of course, we know that young children they're like sponges, they take on in everything. But I think what Imam Ghazali is trying to say is that it's not so much about them filling their heads with information. I'm not even going to use the word knowledge, because I think that ilm doesn't mean information. But it's to do with, as Aisha just said, is to do with having, transmitting or engaging dialogically in a way of relationship whereby you are drawing out the natural fitra of the children. So that isn't, I mean, one of the things I think is that, the Ghazali Children's Project doesn't do this, but it's very easy to say, link what the depth of his, to think that what Imam Ghazali is talking about is something like values-based education, or to start talking about that kind of thing. But actually, no, they don't really tie in that neatly together, because what Imam Ghazali is talking about is much deeper than that. So the point of presence is that a core aspect of his education philosophy is this relation between the teacher and the learner. Okay. Now, what that basically means is that we can't ask the children to be polishing their hearts in ways where our hearts don't have that same quality. Mm-hmm. You can't, to draw these things out of the children, they have to be in you. Mm-hmm. And therefore, education is not, I think Al-Mahada talks about this in one of her chapters in Concentric Circles, really brilliantly, which talks about the two learners. That education is this dialogical relationship between the teacher and the learner, learning together and moving forward together and growing towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together. And that doesn't mean that the learner becomes exactly like the teacher, or that you're somehow turning this learner into this ideal Muslim, okay? And I think that's what we're trying to get across in Shakhsiyah, that Shakhsiyah Islamia isn't this checklist, okay? It isn't like, this is what you are, and then you have Shakhsiyah Islamia. We can tick off that you've got sabr, and you've got shukr, and you've got this, and you've got that. Now you're Shakhsiyah Islamia. It doesn't work like that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't create us all the same. We're not robots. In fact, what it actually is it's enhancing the natural character of that individual Muslim, that individual child, and helping them to realize the best in themselves and helping them to grow in the direction that is good for them. But to do that as a teacher, you have to have a types of education that isn't there in teacher training, okay? I also want to just comment on this term, sa'ada, or happiness. And alhamdulillah, it's lovely to hear that the aim of education isn't, your degree, okay, or your A-level results, or so on, or your GCSEs, or sadly your SATs, or tests for even children as young as 5 years old. It's not that. The aim of education is a sa'ada, is happiness. But what Imam Ghazali means by happiness is not what we commonly think to be happiness. And I do want to make that point, okay? Because we grow up, we live in a society where happiness is a very superficial ideal, okay? And it doesn't have the depth of what Imam Ghazali is talking about. Is the happiness is, and I think Naqib al-Atas kind of captures this in his reworking of Ghazali's educational theory, that happiness is recognizing your place in creation, recognizing where you fit in with your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with others. Somebody asked me this question. Yes, actually, your relationship with others is part of you, okay? Your relationship, for example, with your mother, I think this is probably the relationship that people will be able to understand this. your relationship with your mother is part of you. And it makes you who you are. And that recognition of the respect or the honor or what is due to the others who are around you, and by others, that the whole of creation, that's the environment that we live in, that's the animals that we come across, that's the climate, the earth, all of that is what Ghazali is talking about. As-Sa'ada is when you understand that and you can bring yourself into that state of presence and being, so that you have a closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is you've gone beyond, this is my act, I'm a Muslim because I pray 5 times a day. You've gone far beyond that. And so the Sa'ada that we're talking about has to really be thought through. When we talk about character education, we don't mean just instilling values in children. We mean much, much more than that. And obviously we can't do that justice in an hour, but at least these are ideas that we can begin to start thinking about.
Thank you so much. And I suppose ultimately the ultimate happiness that Al-Ghazali talks about is the happiness in the hereafter. Ultimately, mashallah. Can we also, I'm right, as a practitioner, somebody who is in schools full time, day in and day out, but obviously not during the COVID virus, or virtual school. I do like to, and what is really fascinating, I think, is the similarities, the things that we take for granted every day. You talked about what is not in the teachers' training programs, but actually, I'd like to focus on those things that are in the teachers' training programs and how they got there. Because looking through some of the, I suppose, the principles or some of the methodologies that Al-Ghazali promotes, the idea, the focus on that the parents are, the main responsibility lies with the parents in terms of education, and that the teachers are a partner in that. We already talked about the childhood being a really important period for us to have an influence on the character of the children. In terms of motivations and interest, I know in early years education, interests of children, that's a massive area. We must focus on the interests of the children, but this is something that Al-Ghazali talked about hundreds of years ago. In terms of, you mentioned about obeying the parents and teachers, so there is an element of discipline here. And what's fascinating is how Al-Ghazali talks about how to discipline children. So if they make, what to do when they make progress and achievement, that they should be praised in public, so amongst other peers, so other people can see it and really want to also do good things and aspire to achieve. But also if they make a mistake, that if they make a mistake and the child knows, they can see that the child's made the mistake and they've understood that they've made the mistake, not to address it. That actually if their child continues to make the mistake, then to address them in private. And there is a program called the Restorative Practice program. It's something that's come from the USA, Restorative Justice. In the UK, they call it Restorative Practice. Something my own school uses. And wow, this is something that Imam Ghazali talks about. And it's not punitive. It's something that's making the children reflective. And we don't promote public humiliation. So what I'm saying is that there are lots of examples here. There are examples where Al-Ghazali talks about companions, that we need to make sure that our children are very selective who they keep as companions, that they need to have certain qualities, intelligence, good morals, good character, and truthfulness. How much to what extent? I mean, we can look at what is different and what our schools don't have, what our teacher training providers don't have. But how important is it, Dr. Farah, for us to say, actually, Muslims, Al-Ghazali contributed to what every school is implementing at the moment?
What I would say to that is that definitely the educational thought that came out of Islam, and Imam Ghazali is, one of the pinnacles of that, impacted European educational thought. And, George Makdisi talks about the history of that. And actually, I would say that my experience when I was in school in the 1980s and early 1990s probably had a lot more of the elements of the kind of Ghazalian educational thought than what we have now, when schooling, as we know, has become much more about private initiatives in terms of like a public-private partnership, and you've got the Multi-Academy Trust going out in the UK and this kind of thing. I'm not saying that there aren't elements of very sound educational theory and universal values within the educational programs that we work in. And the best teachers and all the teachers work incredibly hard to draw out some of the kinds of principles that you've described. And, you know, I as you know, that I'm closely involved with the Chartered College of Teaching and work with them in relation to this, which is the UK professional body. And I haven't met in my 25 years any non-Muslim educator that doesn't connect to or talk about the things that I talk about. So as a Muslim, I always say, you know, from an Islamic perspective, this is what we do and this is how we think about education. And people are always love to hear about it, and they saying, yes, you know, this is what we need and this is what I believe in as well, without necessarily saying that they believe in Islam. They agree with what we're talking about, and teachers do this. Okay, so I don't want to take anything away from what teachers do. But what I'm trying to say, the point I'm trying to make is that how we conceptualize education, how we conceptualize is very different now. I mean, the Latin educare has similarities to the term tarbiyah, okay? Like, and Dawood Tawhidi talked about this. But it doesn't, what educare meant isn't what necessarily is happening in schools now. So in our organization, what we've done is to devise 7 principles. So the principles of Schatzi education, to try and work in a space where we are constrained by the education system, and we have to try and incorporate, like, so there's this ongoing sort of juhud, if you like, between us trying to achieve the aims and goals that we've set ourselves and use the pedagogical practices that we've set ourselves. So things like that the parents are ultimately responsible for the children's education in a really meaningful way, that what's happening at home cannot be substituted by what's going on in school. And so how do we build this parent-teacher-learner relationship? And so we have a principle of, you know, of shakhsiyat, which kind of talks about that. And then other principles such as qudwa, of what the teacher is and the leadership of the teacher. We have a principle of taqdir, which really deconstructs what we mean by assessment. These are the kinds of ways that we can sort of like problematize some of the frames of thinking that we work with, take out the good that's in it, because there's always good in things, and we should never throw the baby out with the bathwater, but then try and work with that in a way that we are more truthful and more honest to actually what we're trying to achieve as Muslims, because our educational goals are very different to what we have adopted, you know. And when I say as Muslims, I'm not saying I'm speaking for the you know, over 1 billion Muslims in the world, but like Imam Al-GHAZALI'S educational goals, and people who have worked with those and are trying to take those forward. And I think it is important to say that we come from a different paradigm and different way of understanding what life is about. Whilst it's equally important to say that as human beings, people connect to the good and they connect to the truth. And the teachers, wherever they are and whatever they're doing, I you know, as a teacher, I know what they do, and I know that they work, the sincerity that they work with, and they will take those teachers' guidance and they will turn it into something amazing in the classroom, which perhaps the people who sometimes wrote the teachers' professional guidance and so on, perhaps were not really even thinking about.
Baba, I want to bring
Baba, we have a, yeah, sure. We have a question from someone's raised their hands. If you want to take it.
Yeah, okay. Let me ask a point, and then we'll come back to the person who's raised their hand. Sister Aisha, if you can bring it in here, in one of your videos you talked about the Ghazali project not just being about talking about values, etc., but actually encouraging children to have to be able to have difficult discussions about difficult concepts like God. And I think in one of your videos you talked about the how, where, and why of God, and being able to talk about that.
What happened? The man who's translating the books into Swedish got in touch and said, you know, for the first time, also Yusuf Casewit, I have a language in which I can speak to my children about difficult topics, because book 2, which is the Aqidah, the book of creed for adults, we called it the book of belief. In the 2nd chapter, I mean, imagine you're a mother or a father and your child says to you, who and what and where is God? What one of us could actually answer that correctly and well? And of course, Ghazali does it very simply. And already Azhar University has translated the children's book into Arabic because it says it in a very beautiful, condensed way. And I believe there's an imam in Birmingham using the children's book for his group. But what Farah was just talking about, drawing out, you know, the educare. It means to draw out, not to pile information in, draw out that which we already are. And that is the fitra, you see. And the fitra, the really it's who we already are. We don't have to become anything. We just have to quit doing certain things and be the primordial good that we are. And I know that, for example, when I was telling little 5-year-old Layla that, you know, the story of the two kinds of learning and who we are and the next world, she was only 5, but she was only 5, but she understood it because she recognized the truth. And she walked into the living room where her father was playing the harpsichord. We were in Cairo. And she said, "What is that?" And he said, "I'm playing Bach." And she said, "Who is that?" He said, "Oh, he died 250 years ago." And she put her fists on her hips and she said, "Dad, he's not dead. He's in the next world." Now, this is a 5-year-old. When she was given this material, because their children are so pure that, I'll just take this off the line. Children are so pure that they recognize the truth. And when you tell them these things, they know it, they recognize it. So I always have children, if they've done something wrong, they say, the reply is, "Oh, that's beneath my," you know, so that they're constantly referred back to what they're given as this wonderful image, the golden heart. It gives them something that's visual that they can hold on to. You know, it's not like saying, giving them all kinds of rules, be good, do this, because it's right, and this. But if they have a sense of the heart, even if my little granddaughter, "Oh, what about your heart?" She goes like this, you see, because it gives them some place to go that's useful. So I think, you know, what we're talking about here is the inner sunnah. Yes, spiritualized fiqh, because you always go back to how did he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do everything. And I have a friend, and this is really a moving story. This is really great, and I hope you can all use it. Her daughter was born with spina bifida and finally was going to school. And every day the school would call and say, "Oh, she has had a fit. She's peed on herself. Come get her, come get her." And this friend of mine said every day when the phone rang, her heart sank. "Oh no." And then she thought, would our prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, say, "Oh no," if he got that phone call? No. He would, without a thought, without a, "Oh no," help the child up, do whatever it is. So in a way, what we have to do is every moment imagine, how would he do this? How would he react at this moment? And so what we're really doing is giving the children a way to practice the inner sunnah. It's fine to practice the outer. We can all use sawak, or we can all do whatever. But then you have, this is giving you a chance to experience what it's like from within. You know, I mean, I think this project was just sent at this time for all of us, and not just for our children, for us. And Farah is totally right. If the parents don't get on board, what's a chapter at school going to do for someone who comes home and the mother is backbiting? A mother called me up and she said, "You know, I was at a ladies' party and my daughter Lena whispered in my ear, 'Mom, are you all backbiting?' And I said, 'May I speak to Lena?' And Lena got on the phone, who's 8. She said, 'Auntie Aisha, until I'd read the chapter in backbiting, I'd actually never heard about it.' And I thought, oh my goodness, I never heard about it. My mother used to say once a month to me, 'Dear, if you don't have something nice to say about someone, don't say anything at all.' And so we should be saying this 10 times a day to ourselves. Think how we are all saying, 'Oh, that person's no good. Look how she dresses. Look at this. You know, look at that group of Muslims.' How we shouldn't. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest things we should be teaching our children and ourselves. The thing with the backbiting is so dangerous, and I honestly didn't know whether to include in include, sorry, these are ads that come through, include in the children's story the thing about it's like eating the person's dead flesh.
Yeah.
I did. And I've experienced it. Once you understand this totally, you are unable to do it. It makes you sick. And then when we got to the book on fasting, and by the way, we've just sent out to the whole community, and I hope you've all gotten it, a special Ramadan gift, the Children's Book of Fasting, which you can download but it doesn't have the workbook or the teacher's manual. And then I've recorded it, not all that well, but then for every day of Ramadan, there are activities for children. There's a key lesson on just a paragraph or so with fun things and the art that kids are sending in. This is driving me crazy.
You're clearly a very popular person.
No, it's the landline, and nobody uses the landline.
Can I bring Sister Farah in here before we go to the question from one of the audience members? And that's the dialogical halakha that you have in Schatzi. I want to make sure that we talk about that. And
I'd love to hear about the halakha.
In the way that I've asked the same question to Sister Aisha about being able to encourage our children to have these difficult, challenging questions, that we don't shy away from them. And I know from my own sort of research and sort of experience of talking about you, that the dialogical halakha allows us to have that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the thing with halakha is that it's such a traditional form of learning. And that's what we found in Shakhsiyah schools, is that if you use the halakha, and we use it daily, as a space for children to talk through their understanding of Islam. And what I mean by dialogical is that when halakha is being done as effectively as we'd like it to be, the teacher's not speaking very much. Okay, so you might introduce a little story or tell a parable or whatever, and then you just let the kids talk. And it's a very skilled form of teaching, which actually at Cambridge we have decades of research on how dialogical teaching can transform classrooms. And halakha is I work with colleagues who work in mainstream schools all the time. But with the dialogic halakha, you give children that space. And what happens is that with the time that they're given, they begin to think things through for themselves. And one thing I want to say is never underestimate children, okay? I'm going to just give a couple of examples that came to my mind when Sister Aisha was talking. So I have one example of I think she was about 8 years old, this little girl, and she came up at her teacher and she said, I don't understand this hadith about, when Allah says that, pride is my cloak and greatness my robe. And she said, I don't understand it. Why is Allah being proud? And if you think about it, we reel these things off to children all the time without even necessarily thinking about it ourselves. And the child's asking, why is Allah being proud? Why is Allah doing something that isn't good for us to do? And the dialogic practice is that you don't say, oh, it's because da-da-da-da-da, and answer it. What you do is you take that inner motivation that's come from that child of asking that question, and you say to her, well, what do you think? Why might Allah say that? And you give time. And as teachers, we don't do this, but you give them time. You just stay quiet and let them think it through. And she said, because He's Allah. Because He's the one who made everything, so therefore He should be proud about it. So, that is a moment of teaching and learning, which is, you've got that connection between the learner and the teacher. But it's not the teacher saying, I am the one who knows and I will tell you this. It's that connection of taking a hadith, and that child's never going to change. That concept is going to stay with that child forever now, because they've internalized it. It's part of them. It's part of this inner. And that's what dialogic halakha practice does, is that when it's being done well, you have children asking each other these questions. And they learn how to say, well, what do you think? I thought this. Do you agree? And then what happens is that the knowledge, and by this I mean ilm, which is a very deep and heavy concept, the knowledge, it comes collectively together, and they build it together in a way that they understand the deen and the Quran and hadith in ways that we can't teach them through a lecture or through a bayan or through a dars and so on. Another thing I want to talk about is that what you see then is exactly like Sister Aisha was saying about children. When they hear backbiting, they feel uncomfortable. And I've seen this where children are like, they want to leave because they're not able to cope with what's happening here because their natural fitra is being disturbed. And we've had children, I think it's important to say this in the context of the coronavirus crisis, is that when this shakhsiyah development, inshallah, we had children who face very challenging things, and you see it come out. You see them then say the hadith that are relevant to that, say the ayat, and you see them then have the most amazing amounts of sabr, have the aspect of shukr, which is alhamdulillah, at least we have this. And you see the child say that and even the children say, I've had a child say to me, well, that's what we were doing at Shakhsi all these years, isn't it? Is that so we could deal with this now when it came to bereavement? When it came to dealing with death. That's what it was all about, wasn't it? That now I can deal with this. And that doesn't mean that that automatically they're going to deal with death and bereavement and it's all going to go away, because that's not life, okay? That's a big, huge challenge. But the point is they recognize what this education is for. And ultimately, I'm just going to throw this question out there, and I'm not saying this in any kind of criticism, but our schools across the world now, do we educate our children to deal with death? When we know it's the inevitable aspect of life, the one thing that we know is going to happen, where is it in our curriculum? Where is it even in terms of, I've worked with organizations that develop bereavement policies for schools, because it's not like children don't face this. It's not like something that they've never experienced. So what is our education for? What are we doing? What are we prioritizing? And, this period of time is a really important period of time to just step back, as Imam Al-Ghazali did for 10 years, subhanAllah. But even if we do it for 10 minutes, okay, step back. What's it for? What's the point? And then when we begin to answer that, we can start to reconstruct. And really, he reconstructed it in a beautiful way, in an absolutely amazing way. And, things like the Ghazali Children's Project, things like what we do at Shakhsiyah schools, concentric circles I mentioned before, Al-Mahada, these kinds of things are drawing upon that heritage and then taking it forward. Because his time isn't our time. And we need to do what we can for our time. So inshallah, I hope that from this webinar that we can take things forward, people collaborate, work together, and really bring forward an educational program that does justice to the immense, deep intellectual and spiritual heritage that we have all inherited from figures in our past, like Imam Al-Ghazali.
I'm going to go now to I don't know if it's a sister or brother, Azam. Azam.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Islam.
Really for the delay in coming to you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Assalamu alaikum to all.
Alaikum salam.
Yeah, it wasn't a question. It was a bit of a contribution, if that's okay.
Okay.
If that can be, yeah.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if the speakers, I've just got into this on Zoom just about 10-15 minutes ago. So I have not had the opportunity to hear the whole discussion.
Okay.
But I wanted to just contribute by firstly asking that if the speakers are aware of a program or a curriculum being developed by Jubilee Center in Birmingham. That's one thing I wanted to ask. And I have the links, I can forward them on this group. My own personal background is also working with character education. And I think there are some fundamental points which I thought maybe perhaps I can contribute. And one of that would be that it has to be a kind of a standalone module for it to fulfill its purpose. And that is to be able to have the children internalize universal values independent from a religious affiliation. And only in that they are able to grow into the human beings who can live in a broader society. So I think that's one point. Second point is, of course, this is only a means, and Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that my mission to come was nothing but to perfect noble characteristics. So obviously it ties into the very mission of Islam. But still, it's only a means. And the end, obviously, it's some kind of happiness that has ambiguity. But I think happiness can also be defined as social justice, so that we all can find peace in fulfilling or actualizing all our fitrah and our traits in establishing a social society. And that needs a very social, it requires a social functioning. It is not, cannot be, and should not be exclusive to a religious language, or if I may say, that the mystical aspect that we have kind of restrict a very broader thing that we need to be dealing here with. This education is much more universal than it becoming existential about presence and understanding. It's much more basic, but it's a prerequisite to that.
Yeah,
so
I've got your point.
Yeah,
I've got your point. Thank you for the point. Now, this is a question that often arises when we talk about spirituality. People talk about IQ, they talk about EQ, which is emotional intelligence, talk about spiritual intelligence. Do you need to be religious to be able to have values, to be able to reflect, to be able to share, to be able to do lots of the things that we've been talking about? Ultimately, talking about the hereafter, that's something that's restricted. Of course, you can still talk about death. So the question is, I suppose, in just kind of formulating this into a question, is how can we involve people of no religion in what is there an offering for the secular public, or is our audience just a religious grouping of people? And that's the question for both of you.
You want to start, Farah?
Okay. No, inshallah, I think I'm familiar with the Jubilee Centre's work. I actually work with somebody who was previously working there. That is actually also funded by the Templeton Foundation. You know, the roots of that is coming from the Christian tradition. And the reason I raise that point is because I think that it's important to recognize that people of no religion do have values. Of course they do, and they have ways of formulating those values. But when you look at Western ethical philosophy, which is where people without religion tend to go back to, the structures of that are incredibly limited. And my take on it is that we respect everybody, and we respect those forms, whether it's utilitarianism or Kantian ethics or so on, the moral imperative. But the point is that what Imam al-Ghazali, to get back to what we're talking about, is in terms of spirituality, is that spirituality goes beyond those kinds of ethics and values. And spirituality, in essence, has been around God. Okay, it's been around God or multiple gods. Obviously, we come from the monotheistic tradition, and that's, for us, a higher form of spirituality. But the thing is that to try and, I think the point I'm trying to make is that with morality, you can have a dialogue and you can talk about things in a particular kind of way. But when it comes to the spiritual, yes, there is spirituality without God, and people practice that and so on. It feeds back often into nature. For us as Muslims, that nature is just a representation of something much deeper and much beyond. And I think in a way it ties in with what we've been saying about the outer and the inner. That nature is something that you feel a sense of spirituality when you see a beautiful sunset. But what's behind that sunset, and we don't mean scientifically, we mean going beyond that. Those are questions that I think that, why should we not be confident enough to say that? Is that, yes, there's a level of spirituality here, but we want to take it to another level, or take it a little bit further. Ultimately, when we interact with another human being, that's something that we need to do with a very pure heart. We need to do it with a good niyyah. We need to do that with understanding them to be as valuable as us, because they're a human being. But we also need to have the confidence to say, this is our worldview. This is what I believe in. This is, to me, what spirituality is. Yes, I recognize what you're saying, and alhamdulillah, that's good. But there are layers of meaning in our heritage that you may want to learn from. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my personal sort of take on it. Perhaps Sister Aisha has got something to add to that.
Well, a very good question, sir.
Yeah.
And my experience, because of course, the central points being made by Imam Al-Ghazali are universal, absolutely. And I have a girl who types for me. She's just graduating from a Catholic university. And because I'm old and I don't really type at all. And she's a new typist. And all the stuff I'm doing, like she's typing Ghazali, right? And she one day said to me, I don't believe any of this stuff. She said, I was raised, my grandparents were Catholic, but my parents weren't into anything. And I have no feeling of self-worth and no sense of purpose. And that's the reason so many people of my generation are committing suicide. You know, the suicide thing is huge in the world. When I heard that, I thought, oh my God, this person has come to me, right? So I'm also working, taking everything I've learned from Ghazali to create a program for general school systems where all these ideas are being presented in a way that is outside of a religious framework. I figure if you can't say this to people who don't believe anything, you know, it's got to be able to be said that way. I mean, maybe you can't say, well, we call this a fitra and these people call it a Christ nature and these people call it a Buddha nature. They don't want any, by the way, she doesn't want any religious terminology. So I simply said, have you noticed in yourself there's an innate goodness? She didn't say anything. I said, you know, do you like when people are angry? Do you like violence? Oh no. Well, that's because your innate goodness doesn't like these things. Now, what kinds of people do you like? And she'd say, well, people who are kind and generous. We're talking about the qualities, character, right? Oh, so these qualities you like. Why don't we make a study of these qualities? You know, wouldn't you like to have these for yourself? Do you see what I'm saying? And you build right into, well, now she's at ease. She's now typing the book of Hajj, which is all about death, you know, because there is a way to put these universal ideas into another language. But the thing is, our children, aren't they blessed? Because if they are immediately given, like when Farah was talking about the halakha, when you let the child go and everyone listens, that's starting to respect them, not just teach down to them, and acknowledge their inner dignity, you know, to give them a sense that they can be aligned with their inner dignity and they can feel that. We can all feel it. You know, I know if I've been lazy and didn't do what I was supposed to do, I can feel I'm off center. You know, once at Harvard Medical School in 1989, the Dalai Lama was asked about disease. And he said, disease, dis-ease, for the most part is stress. And he said, and I don't mean the kind of stress that you feel when your marriage is falling apart or you don't have a job or whatever it is. He said, I'm talking about the stress that we all have when we are out of line with our inner dignity, when we are off. And I know what he's talking about. I always feel the stress of not being who I really should be. And it's there. And it's part of what comes with us, you know, something beautiful.
Thank you so much. We're going to go to our final question.
All right.
And that's Idris Kamisa from, I believe, South Africa. So if I can ask him, Mizan, to unmute. Here you go. Over to you. I think we're going to unmute your mic first. Just a minute. Let's unmute his mic.
Yeah, I've done that already. I've unmuted him.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Okay,
Yeah,
can you hear me now?
Off you go, yes.
Assalamu alaikum. It is so good to listen to Dr. Farah and Sister Aisha. It's just a comment, you know, that I think, you know, the points that you're emphasizing in the end it's about the teacher in terms of not only the methodology, it's also in terms of his relationship with our Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also the relationship with the students. And I don't know whether you would subscribe to what I have experienced, that many teachers, sadly, you know, we all need to rekindle the passion for our children, rekindle a passion for learning, and also look at our own level of spirituality, whether if you want to have a profound impact on the lives of our children. Because sadly, many boys and girls today find education irrelevant. They don't feel that the teachers are able to connect with them. I know it's quite a few things I'm saying, but what kind of advice do you have for teachers, you know, 2 or 3 things? What should be the attributes if they want to really impact on the students?
Shukran, thank you so much. In fact, actually, that links with what was going to be my final question to you both, kind of a parting advice, if you like, for those people who are involved in educating young people, be they parents or formal teachers. What advice, Haji Idris has mentioned, what advice would you give to enable them to develop their own spirituality? Ultimately, you can't give what you don't have, as the Arab saying goes. How can you develop your own spirituality? How can, what training is there for example, something like the Al-Ghazali project, in order to be an effectively teach spirituality? And also parting words in terms of further reading on Imam Al-Ghazali. What would you recommend? We couldn't do justice, obviously. It would be lovely to talk for the next 10 hours, but for an hour and a half, I know that there are lots of audience members who will want to do some further research if there are any pointers of where they could go. Thank you.
Well, I would like to say that about the teachers, we don't learn from what teachers say, we learn from how teachers are as people. You know, when I go back to, I studied with a great man, Joseph Campbell, and honestly, when I look at videos about him, it doesn't matter what he's saying. What I loved was his love and his gentleness and his kindness. And once I was very ill, I was paralyzed for a year with Guillain-Barré, and I thought I'll never be able to do anything anymore. So what am I going to do with my life? And I remembered that a doctor in Cairo, beautiful woman, Zahir Abdeen, who was always kind and always, I thought people don't need people to be doing things. People need people to be something. So we should pretend to be who we already are. And that will be the greatest teaching we can do, you know, but for students, to show them how to do these things. And Ghazali ends the Book of Knowledge, by the way, and the Kitab al-Ilm, the first book, is said, like the Quran is said to be contained in the Fatiha. The Book of Knowledge is said to contain the entire Ihya al-Ulumuddin. And he ends it by speaking of the 2 trees. He says we are all teachers because we're always copying somebody every moment. So we say to the students and the children, think, is this something you want copied? And he says the straight tree casts a straight shadow and the crooked tree a crooked one. So what he's speaking about is that if we cast a straight shadow by the way we are, those who are around us, that's what they'll learn. So it does come back to every single one of us being who we really are, or pretending to be for the time being until we become what we practice.
Lovely, thank you so much. And Sister Farah?
I think that what Sister Aisha said is very, very important. It's about learning to be who we are, and Allah has created each and every one of us as unique. And we have to get to know ourselves. And I think in terms of developing our own understanding, there isn't a set route. This is one of the most amazing things about our deen, about Islam, is that it's not the case that if you go this way, this is the best way for you. Ask Allah, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, to guide you. Look at what works for you. For some people, you know, a traditional learning course will work for them. For some people, watching videos or reading books will work for them. Some people attending a local halaqah. There are many online free lectures and courses on Imam Al-Ghazali. I know that Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad has done a lengthy session, which I think is I think it's available for free, but if not, then it's worth paying for. There, and when I say Imam al-Ghazali, I mean the Ihya Ulumuddin at the Shri, a commentary on it and an explanation of it. You can purchase the book. You may say that the Alchemy of Happiness is an abridged version of the Ihya. The Islamic Text Society, Sister Aisha's previous project, publishes some amazing books, and there's videos available. There's all sorts of places that you can go to. I do also want to say that at Schatzi, we haven't been, our teacher education program has been face-to-face, and we've now, with the lockdown, we're going online. We're trying, it wasn't something that any of us really wanted to do, but I'll be doing another talk tomorrow, inshallah, which you will be publicizing on our Facebook and Twitter. So you can join that. We do plan to sort of produce and develop a broad teacher education program. But is like all projects, it's going to be a work in progress. It's going to be a slow thing that we want to do online, because we could, I think that is a platform that more and more of us need to get used to. Inshallah, there's all sorts of paths, find yours, find what's right for you. Don't necessarily, if you start on something, it doesn't work for you, go to something else. But remember, as a teacher, that your being, who you are, the quality of it is going to impact your learners. And the ulama, they understood this. That's why they would work on themselves. That's why it's well known that they would spend the nights in salah, in prayer, in the Hajj, and then spend their days teaching. And just want to end with, I think it's a saying attributed to Imam al-Ghazali. I haven't yet managed to find the reference, but the saying is that every Muslim is always either a teacher or a learner, because life is about learning and growth. And so in essence, as a teacher, you are also always a learner. And to not forget that, inshallah, is that this is something that is part of our being as human beings, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. We're going to end it there. Thank you so much for both of your wonderful contributions. It's been an absolute pleasure. I wish we could go on for the next 10 hours, but we simply can't. We've got iftar coming up shortly here in the UK. Jazakumullah khair to you. Thank you so much to Brother Mirza for bringing us together. Thank you to all of the audience members. I hope you have benefited. Please, I hope you will follow some of the references for further reading and study, inshallah. Really, there is so much to learn, inshallah. And as educators, it's important that we continue our lifelong learning, inshallah. I pray that Allah accepts our fasting and our prayers and our charity during this blessed month, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Oh Allah, grant us good in this world, grant us good in the hereafter, and protect us from the punishment of the hellfire. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.